Notre-Dame de Paris by Victor Hugo, Book 2, The Place, the Grave. Today only, one, all but imperceptible trace is left of the Place de Grève as it was then. This is the charming turret which occupies the northern corner of the square, which has already been buried beneath the shameful paint clogging the sharp edges of its sculptures, and will soon perhaps have gone submerged by the spate of new houses so rapidly engulfing the old facades of Paris. Those people who, like ourselves, never cross the Place de Grève without bestowing a glance of sympathy and compassion on this poor turret, throttled between two Louis Quinze ruins, can easily reconstruct in their mind's eye the group of buildings to which it belonged, and so recover the old 15th century Gothic square in its entirety. It was, as today, an irregular trapezium, bordered on one side by the quay, and on the other three by a series of tall, narrow, gloomy houses. By day, one could admire the diversity of its buildings, all carved in stone or wood, and offering complete specimens of the varied medieval styles in domestic architecture, ranging from the 15th century back to the 11th, from the casement window, which was beginning to oust the pointed window, back to the semicircular Romanesque arch, which had been supplanted by the pointed arch, but still occupied underneath it the first story of the ancient house of the Tour Roland, on the corner of the square overlooking the Seine, next to the Rue de la Tannerie. By night, all that could be made out of this mass of buildings was the black saw edge of the roofs, unfurling their chain of acute angles around the square. For one of the radical differences between towns then and towns now is that nowadays it is the fronts of houses that overlook the street, whereas then it was the gable ends. In the past 2 centuries, houses have turned about. In the center, on the eastern side of the square, stood a heavy hybrid construction formed of 3 adjoining mansions. It was known by 3 different names, which explained its history, its purpose, and its architecture. The Maison au Dauphin, because Charles V had lived in it as Dauphin. The Marchandise, because it had served as a town hall. The Maison aux Pillars, Domus ad Pilario, or Piloria, because of the row of fat pillars supporting its 3 stories. Here, the town could find everything a fine town like Paris needs: a chapel for praying to God, a courtroom for holding court and putting the king's men in their place if need be, and in the attics an arsenal full of artillery. For the burgesses of Paris knew that situations can arise when it is not easy to pray or plead for the city's freedoms, and they always keep a good rusty arquebus or 2 in reserve in the attic of the town hall. The Grève already wore that sinister aspect still preserved today by the hateful image it evokes, and by Dominique Bocador's gloomy Hotel de Ville, which has replaced the Maison aux Pillars. It must be said that a gibbet and a pillory, a justice and a ladder, as they were then called, stood permanently side by side in the middle of the paving, and helped not a little to avert people's gaze from that fateful square, where so many human beings, full of life and vigor, had met their death, and where, 50 years later, Saint Valer's fever would be born, that sickness of the terror of the scaffold, and the most monstrous of all sicknesses, because it comes not from God, but from men. It is a consoling thought, be it said in passing, to reflect that capital punishment, whose iron wheels, stone gibbets, and whole panoply of tortures were set permanently into the ground 300 years ago, and obstructed the Grève, Les Halles, the Place Dauphin, the Croix du Taureau, the Marche à Porcenu, the ghastly Montfaucon, the Barrière des Sergeants, the Place aux Chats, the Porte Saint-Denis, Champeau, the Porte Baudets, and the Porte Saint-Jacques, not to mention the innumerable ladders of the provost, and the bishops, chapters, abbots, priors, with legal authority, nor the judicial drownings in the river Seine, it is comforting, as I say, that today, having lost all the pieces of her armor one by one, her superfluity of torments, her inventive and fantastic punishments, the torture for which every 5 years she remade a leather bed in the Grand Chalet, this old suzerain of feudal society has been almost eliminated from our laws and our towns, has been hunted down from code to code, and driven out town square by town square, until now, in all the vastness of Paris, she has only one dishonored corner of the Grève and one miserable guillotine, furtive, anxious, and ashamed, which always vanishes very swiftly after it has done its work, as if it were afraid of being caught in the act. And that is the end of the third section.